The rain in Normandy came down like cold knives, slicing through the smoke and mud. The war had been raging for days, and the ground was littered with fragments of helmets, torn maps, and faces that no longer had names. Near a burned-out American truck, German engineer Captain Karl Heinemann stepped into a puddle that shimmered strangely under the gray sky. Something metallic lay half buried in the water. He reached down and pulled it out, a small brass rectangle, scratched, soaked, heavy, a Zippo lighter. He flicked it open out of habit. The flint sparked once. Then, impossibly, a steady flame rose from the soaked cotton. It burned clean, stubborn against the wind. His comrade, Lieutenant Otto Reinhardt, stared in disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "Water kills fire." Heinemann turned the lighter in his hand, watching the reflection of the flame on the wet ground. "Not their fire," he murmured. The rain poured harder, but the flame did not surrender. In that moment, surrounded by ruin, something in him shifted. The battlefield had shown him destruction, but this tiny object, this defiant light, showed him endurance. Behind them, artillery echoed from the cliffs, dull and distant. Yet Heinemann kept watching the flame, as if trying to understand a language he had never been taught. A small American engraving was visible on the lid, Zippo MFG, CO, Bradford, PA. He pocketed it carefully, not as loot, but as a question. How could something so ordinary survive in a place where even men couldn't? The war would bury countless machines, tanks, and doctrines, but this, he felt, would outlive them all. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there as you see this small flame in the rain? Back in the makeshift engineering room at Camp Aliceville, Alabama, the lighter sat under a dim bulb like a captured secret. Months had passed since Normandy. Karl Heinemann and Otto Reinhardt, now prisoners of war, were given access to a small workshop to repair tools for the American guards. But that night, when the guards left, they spread a torn wool blanket across the table and placed the Zippo at its center. It had no ornamentation, no complex fittings, no polish of prestige, just a hinge, a flint wheel, a wick, a cotton reservoir, and a spring. Yet, the metal felt deliberate, perfectly weighted in the hand. Otto fetched a screwdriver from the bench. "Let's see what kind of genius hides behind simplicity," he said, half mocking. Screws turned. The lighter opened like a miniature book. They examined every component with the reverence of scientists before a specimen that refused to explain itself. "So crude," Otto muttered. "So ordinary. No engraving, no craftsmanship." Karl smiled faintly. "And yet it works everywhere, even in mud." He recalled the Normandy rain and the stubborn flame that refused to die. "We designed for precision," he continued. "They designed for life." In Germany, a mechanism had to be perfect. Every gear, every groove, a testament to mastery. But here, the Americans had chosen reliability over beauty. The hinge was slightly loose by design, allowing easy flicking with one hand. The flint wheel was rough but replaceable. The wick, though small, was engineered to pull fuel by capillary action even after soaking. Otto leaned closer. "They think backward. They don't worship the machine. They use it as a servant." Karl wrote quietly in the corner of his notebook. "Perhaps the difference between us and them is that they design for the man who drops his lighter, not the man who builds it." In the barracks next door, men were playing cards under a single bulb. Someone was humming an old folk song about home. The two engineers didn't notice. Their world had shrunk to the glow of that dissected Zippo, an object that embodied something they had never studied: humility in engineering. By midnight, Otto reassembled the lighter, filled it with a few drops of gasoline from a spare generator tank, and clicked it open. The flame rose instantly. It burned steady, quiet, like an answer neither of them wanted to admit. Karl closed the notebook and said, "You know, maybe the real innovation is faith. Faith that simple things, done right, can survive chaos." Outside, Alabama's summer night buzzed with crickets. Inside, two defeated engineers watched a flame built by their enemies, now illuminating their own awakening. Morning light spilled through the wooden slats of the camp barracks. The engineers gathered again, the Zippo sitting on a small desk like a relic. Otto had polished its lid the night before, and now it gleamed like a mirror. When Carl leaned over, his reflection stared back at him, eyes tired, beard rough, face older than his years. One of the younger soldiers, Franz, passed by and stopped. "It shines like silver," he said softly. "Can I?" He picked it up, tilted it toward the window, and saw his own faint reflection. "One of the prisoners in the next block," Franz added, "uses it to shave. He said he sees his wife every morning in this." The room went silent. That sentence lingered longer than gunfire. Each man thought of someone, a face waiting in Dresden, Munich, Hamburg. For a moment, the war vanished, replaced by kitchens, laughter, and Sunday mornings that felt a lifetime away. Carl closed his eyes. He could almost smell the soap his wife used to buy from the corner store, the scent of rye bread, the way she hummed while sewing. That tiny reflection in the Zippo's lid was more than metal. It was memory made visible, proof that even in captivity, men searched for something human. Otto broke the silence. "Strange, isn't it? We build weapons to erase faces, and they build tools to preserve them." He turned the lighter over, studying its edges. The scratches caught the light like veins of gold. There was a faint engraving. Windproof, guaranteed. He wondered what kind of mind engraved such confidence in the middle of war. Carl recorded in his diary that night, "A small flame burns differently when it carries warmth instead of destruction." The next day, as guards brought coffee to the engineers, one of them, a young American from Ohio named Miller, noticed the lighter on the table. "You guys like that thing, huh?" he said, half smiling. "It's been through more battles than I have." Carl looked up. "It works." Miller grinned. "Yeah, it always does." The casual tone, the easy pride, struck Carl deeply. It was the voice of a nation that didn't worship machinery, but trusted it, because it was built for ordinary hands, for people, not perfection. When Miller left, Otto whispered, "He says it like it's obvious." Carl nodded slowly. "That's what makes it powerful." The lighter clicked shut with a sound crisp and final. Outside, a guard's radio hummed with American swing music. Inside, two German engineers stared at a reflection too small for their pride but big enough to show their hearts. By mid-1945, the Alabama heat wrapped around the camp like a blanket. The war in Europe was over, but the prisoners were still waiting for ships to take them home. The engineers' workshop had become a small kingdom of ideas, broken tools fixed, small experiments built, quiet debates about what had gone wrong with the German dream. The Zippo lighter sat on the workbench, its metal dulled from weeks of use. One afternoon, as thunder rolled over the red clay hills, Carl stood before the group of POW engineers. He held up the lighter and said, "They didn't design for engineers, they designed for soldiers." Otto frowned. "What do you mean?" Carl flipped the lid open with one hand, letting the flame dance. "Look, the hinge, loose enough to flick open with gloves, the flint, replaceable in seconds, the wick, protected from wind by the chimney holes. Everything about this is made for a man in the field, not in a factory." Silence spread. Even Otto, who once mocked the simplicity, looked closer. "They built it for chaos," he said. Carl nodded. "They build as if the man matters more than the mechanism." He paused, letting the words hang in the heavy air. Then quietly, "That is genius. Not precision, but empathy turned into engineering." Otto rubbed the lighter between his fingers. "In Germany, we build to prove mastery. In America, they build so no man feels powerless." Through the open window, they could see American guards chatting, one lighting a cigarette in the rain with the same lighter. The tiny orange glow in the drizzle looked almost sacred. That night, Carl wrote another note in his small ledger. "Empathy can be measured in millimeters, the looseness of a hinge, the reach of a thumb. The Americans understand that." Later, a storm hit the camp. The barracks rattled, the lights flickered out, and men cursed in the dark. Someone shouted for a match, then a soft click. A flame bloomed in the black room, the same Zippo held high by Carl. Dozens of faces turned toward it, the light flickering over walls scarred by years of captivity. The war was over, yet that small flame seemed to promise something larger. That design could serve dignity, and machines could carry mercy. Outside, thunder cracked, but inside, no one spoke. The lighter hissed softly, steady as a heartbeat. Weeks later, as camp life slowed into routine, Carl noticed something folded inside the lighter's inner casing. A slip of yellowed paper, thin as onion skin, tucked beneath the fuel cotton. He pulled it out carefully. The others leaned closer. On the paper, faint but legible, were words printed in English. Zippo, MFG, Co., Bradford, PA. Guaranteed for life. Should it ever fail, we fix it free. The room fell still. Otto read the words again, slower this time. Guaranteed for life? He laughed once, but it wasn't mocking. In wartime? Franz looked confused. They make a promise while bombs fall over their factories? Carl traced the words with his thumb. They fight a war and still promise forever, he said softly. That's unthinkable. They sat for a long moment, the sound of cicadas outside rising and falling like a pulse. The lighter gleamed faintly in the half-light. Otto finally spoke. Maybe that's their real weapon. Belief. They keep believing, even when everything burns. Later, they asked Miller, the American guard from Ohio, about it. He grinned. Yeah, that's real. Zippo fixes them for free. Doesn't matter if you're in a trench or a ship. You send it back, they fix it. Always have. Carl couldn't answer. His whole life, he'd built machines for generals, for precision, for pride. Never for people. And here was a company in the middle of war that still honored the individual, still trusted the promise of a single sentence. We fix it free. That night, in his journal, he wrote, a contract signed not in ink, but in faith. That is the rarest alloy in any civilization. The next morning, the engineers discussed it over breakfast. Otto mused, we had rules for loyalty. They had guarantees for trust. Maybe that's the difference. Carl looked at the lighter again. They build objects that outlive fear. Even in chaos, they honor the ordinary man. That's the foundation of their strength. He turned to the men around him and said, when we go home, remember this. The greatness of a nation isn't how many machines it builds. It's how many promises it keeps. A long pause followed. Some nodded, others stared at the flame flickering in Carl's hand. To the audience, would you still keep your word if the world around you was falling apart? The question hung in the air, quieter than the ticking rain on the barracks roof. By the time autumn touched Alabama, the war had ended. The camp had grown quieter, less guarded, more human. Red Cross trucks came and went. Prisoners repaired fences, planted gardens, wrote letters that would take months to cross the ocean. But for Carl and Otto, the lighter remained their quiet obsession. One afternoon, Otto filled it with the last drops of gasoline they could find. Let's see how long your American miracle lasts, he joked. They watched as the flame burned strong, then slowly dimmed when the fuel ran out. But instead of dying, the wick glowed, a faint ember still breathing against the wind. Even empty, it pretends to have hope, Franz murmured. Everyone laughed. Not mockery this time, but recognition. The lighter seemed alive, refusing to die like the country that built it. Carl smiled. Maybe that's what they mean by spirit, he said. Not strength, but endurance. That night, Miller brought a newspaper clipping showing American troops in the Pacific lighting cigarettes under palm trees. The same lighters, the same click. The image stunned them. One small object linking men across oceans. Soldiers, mechanics, captives, guards. Carl whispered, the same flame everywhere, a language of its own. The group fell into silence. Otto finally said, we measured civilization by monuments. They measure it by a man's pocket fire. Carl nodded, and theirs still burns. Later, as they sat outside the barracks, the orange sunset smeared across the horizon. Carl flipped open the lighter one last time. You know, he said softly, maybe the real difference is not how they build, it's why they build. He turned to the men and asked, if you had to design one thing to represent your country, what would it be? A weapon, a monument, or something small enough to hold in your palm? The question lingered like smoke. No one answered. Each man stared at the tiny flame, realizing that even stripped of rank, uniform, or homeland, they still carried the capacity to be moved by something simple, something built with care. In the darkening yard, the Zippo flicked shut with its signature click, echoing like punctuation to an era that was ending. 14 years passed. The world had changed its maps, rebuilt its cities, and buried its dead. By 1959, Karl Heinemann was no longer the sharp-eyed engineer of war, but a quiet man with silver hair and trembling hands. He lived in Bremen, teaching apprentices in a small repair shop near the harbor. The past rarely visited, until one morning while cleaning an old trunk, he found a small tin box. Inside lay the Zippo, tarnished, scarred, but intact. He turned it over, his reflection faint in the dull brass. The hinge still moved with that same unmistakable click. Carl smiled, a soundless exhale of disbelief. His son, Eric, 14, looked up from a stack of mechanical sketches. "What's that, father?" Carl handed him the lighter. "Something I learned from, more than from any professor." He refilled it carefully with lighter fluid, the same gesture he had performed years ago in captivity. One flick, and the flame bloomed instantly. Eric's eyes widened. "After all this time?" Carl nodded. "Yes, because it was made to serve, not to impress." He let the flame dance between them, soft and steady. "We built machines to win battles," he said. "They built ideas to survive centuries." Eric tilted his head. "Ideas?" Carl closed the lid gently. "They built for people, for the soldier in the rain, the worker in the field, the boy who will inherit their tools. That's how fire stays alive." He placed the Zippo on the windowsill, where it caught the afternoon sun. Outside, Bremen's shipyards hummed again with new industry. American cargo cranes unloading aid, German hands rebuilding with borrowed steel and newfound humility. For a long while, Carl stood watching the reflection of light on the glass. The same glow that once flickered in a muddy battlefield now shimmered over a peaceful harbor. It was more than nostalgia. It was continuity, proof that ideas forged in compassion endure longer than those forged in conquest. The room fell quiet. The clock ticked softly. Wind pressed against the window. Carl whispered, almost to himself, "Empires fall. Fire stays, especially the kind born from thought." He turned off the lamp, leaving only the memory of that small flame burning in his mind. The flame that had survived rain, war, and pride. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of ships' horns across the North Sea. Inside, the lighter rested, silent, eternal. No music, only the sound of the world breathing again. History often hides its deepest truths in small, ordinary things. A lighter, no bigger than a man's hand, carried the weight of two worlds, one built on precision and control, the other on trust and simplicity. Through that brass shell, Karl Heinemann had glimpsed something far more enduring than engineering, a civilization that believed empathy could be designed into metal, that care could be mass-produced, and that even the smallest object could hold the dignity of its maker. Years later, long after the barracks were torn down and the guards went home, that lesson lingered. The Zippo was not merely a tool for fire. It was a promise that even in chaos, humanity could be functional, durable, and kind. The Germans in Camp Aliceville had once mocked it for being crude, too simple, too American. But simplicity had been the point all along. It wasn't about perfection. It was about forgiveness. The forgiveness of a mechanism that worked even when handled roughly, like a world trying to heal after breaking itself apart. Carl's flame had outlasted his anger, his defeat, his youth. And somewhere in that persistence lay the secret of why America's machines were more than metal. They were mirrors of belief. In the end, it wasn't the armies that impressed him most, but a design philosophy. Build not for glory, but for those who must endure. He once wrote in his final notebook, now yellowed with time, "The greatest invention is faith disguised as function." Tonight, as the camera fades, imagine that same old Zippo still sitting on the windowsill, quiet, waiting, capable of burning again with a single flick. Because some fires never go out.